And we're delighted to have Karim Saeed here. Karim is the Chief Information Security Officer for NASA headquarters. And NASA, in many ways, is a great example to use for today's discussions. It's highly decentralized. It has partnerships across government and with all sorts of private sector and NGO organizations, and deals with just massive amounts of data and sprawling networks. So there are plenty of challenges to deal with there. But Karim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Troy, for having me. I like the picture you have up of me there. It makes me look really mysterious and cool.
We've got a couple of those today. So I know the topic of the title on this session is about transforming threat detection at NASA. And there's been a lot of change at NASA, but I know that you're a little bit skeptical of the idea of transformation as the primary term here. You want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. I kind of bristle whenever I see anything that looks like a buzzword or, a clickbait sort of title, and transformation definitely kind of picks at my spidey sense with regards to that. My background is in engineering. My background is in human-centered computing research, and the transformations there aren't really these big sea changes as we might, as much as we might like to believe. They're iterative improvements, small changes over time that contribute to good progress in general, but they're seldom these big sea-changing, big paradigm-shifting things that you would usually associate with a word like transforming. So, yeah.
Okay. But there's been a tremendous amount of change at NASA, and you've been there in your current role for just a year or two, but you've been involved with NASA in a variety of ways for what, 7-8 years now? Is that?
Yeah, maybe closer to a decade, actually. Yeah. So currently I'm serving as the CISO at headquarters, as you mentioned at the top. Prior to that, I was a deputy CISO for a couple of years, and prior to that, I was working on the application security assessment team as a contractor, and I think that goes back to 2010, 2011. Yeah. So various capacities.
So okay, I'll let you pick the appropriate start date, whether it's when you started in that contractor capacity or when you moved to the deputy CISO job. But tell us a little bit about how NASA has been evolving. I take your point that it's a lot of iterative changes and continuous improvement. But when you step back and look at the larger arc or evolution, what are the key developments that you see that we should be focused on here today?
Yeah, sure. So thematic of my experiences at NASA are that the improvements that we've witnessed have all been directly related to lowering the barriers to entry for collaboration and communication across different teams and disciplines at the agency, very much so in the IT space. I know that in the past, when I first started off, I would maybe phone in to any number of teleconferences throughout the day that were focused on these siloed groups. You have your ICANN team, you have your incident response team, you have your configuration management team, and they were all very kind of insular and isolated and siloed. And the greatest improvement that I've experienced over the last decade that I've been at the agency has been bridging those teams by lowering the barriers to entry for communication and collaboration across them. And if we get down to it, like the big transformational things were really just maybe giving access to our enterprise source control systems and making it easier to join those collaboration platforms, making it easier to contribute to our source control platforms. This is a small change, really just opening up the ability for people to create accounts and use those systems, but they led to the breaking down of barriers between these previously siloed organizations. And that's done wonders, I think, for the cybersecurity community and the IT community at NASA in general.
Yeah, that sort of goes to the obvious question I had, which is how do you kind of create the space or the framework for this sort of culture change? Because a lot of it is the individuals and bringing someone like you in who is dispositionally inclined to reach across and try and bridge the silos. But if you don't put the frameworks, whether it's governance, whether it's specific tools in place, then that culture can follow the individual change agent out the door at some point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I kind of, I'm prone to referencing my academic references whenever I talk about stuff like this. And one of the big ones is Wanda Orlikowski, who works at MIT Sloan Business School and has a focus on computer-supported cooperative work. And thematic of her research has always been that introducing technology seldom has any benefit to an organization. Influencing those culture changes and making sure that you're sensitive to the power dynamics within an organization, that's really the dominating factor in how effective a team is. I would say that in the cybersecurity realm, where we were maybe previously very siloed up in these areas of expertise, the thing that we did to make sure that people could communicate and collaborate more easily is by flattening any sort of hierarchies that were involved. So I think I was asked for a bio for this event, and I usually cringe when I think of my own title. Like, I don't even really like titles. I prefer to go by just a small part of the broader cybersecurity community at NASA. And I very much believe that to be the case. I am one small part of a large organization where hierarchy doesn't really facilitate anything. Flattening the barriers to communication, making collaboration easier, that's really where your benefits come from. And I want to say that if you want to get really down to it, I can come up with a few good anecdotes. The first one was the source control system. So we have an enterprise source control system, and really opening up the doors to who could have access to that system, where traditionally maybe it was only software engineers. Opening that up and making it available to people whose focus is policy, or making it available to people whose focus is maybe just writing technical articles, helped a great deal. Another one is maybe our incident response management system. So this is the ticketing system that we use to track the remediation of incidents as they occur. One of the best changes that I've seen is a small one, again, an iterative one. It's the free form text field at the bottom of any incident form, shifting and being used more. It used to be the case that people felt they had to write these long form, very formal articles that they would post to that free form text box. And over the last decade, what I've observed is that now it's just getting snippets and thoughts from people. And that small change has done a monumental amount to improving our general incident response capacity. Mm-hmm. So two good anecdotes for you, I think.
Absolutely. And when we spoke prior to this event, you also talked about the role that the SOCs play, not just in obviously monitoring the threats, but in encouraging that communication. Can you talk a little bit about how that the structure has led to the culture there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to think of our SOC as an API, an advanced people interface, right? So it's this organization that's tasked with managing incident response across the agency, but also with fielding information that comes in from external entities, whether it's DHS cyber hygiene reports or whether it's independent researchers reporting vulnerabilities that they've discovered to the agency. That being kind of like a central place where we could manage communications with those types of folks. And then on the other end, reporting outwards to organizations like US CERT and stuff like that. Very much so, the structure of the SOC contributes to our ability to make that communication easier, whether it's inbound or outbound. And improving those lines of communication, it's done a great deal. And, credit where it's due. Over the last several years, for sure, the programs that CISA has developed in terms of reporting things to the agency, they've been monumental and helped us such a good amount in improving our overall ability to deal with threats, vulnerabilities, et cetera.
Yeah. And I want to come back to those sort of external agencies and the sort of government-wide actors here in a minute. But let's stay inside NASA for the moment. And in the previous panel, they were talking about the data that's needed to stay on top of insider threat analysis. And NASA, the different centers are very decentralized. There's been a kind of cultural bias toward sharing information with the public, but not necessarily always within NASA when it comes to internal data. How has this kind of bridge building and creating space for better collaboration, has this extended to how you're connecting different data sets, whether it's for the specific threat analysis or just the broader collaboration?
Yeah. Democratizing access to our aggregated data sources has definitely been a huge boon to, again, what were previously siloed centers or mission directorates and the work that they did. I know for a fact that, if we would take as another anecdote, so the availability of tools via CDM, right, which federal agencies across the federal government have all benefited from, simply having a platform to facilitate how we were going to implement those tool sets helped us a great deal and led us down this path of, this is data that we can benefit from across the agency, not necessarily just insularly at our center. And that's, again, it's been a huge thematic transformation, if you will, at the agency during my tenure here.
And the CDM example, I think, is an interesting one because clearly it provides a lot of tools. But if I hear you correctly, you're saying that the biggest, or a big value, if not the biggest, is sort of forcing you and your counterparts to think about how those tools can be combined and integrated creatively into the existing systems and missions. So it's that problem-solving process. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it. So it's not the tools, right? It was the fact that the availability of the tools facilitated conversations across these teams. Implementing those tools provided us with a common problem that we would have to collaborate on to address. Mm-hmm. And the benefits from that collaboration, I would argue to say that was more valuable than the tools themselves. So, yeah.
Interesting. And has that led to similar collaboration with other agencies? And I'm thinking about specifically the CDM process, but we can also jump to the kind of bigger picture of working with CISA and US CERT and NIST. But let's start with CDM. Has the problem solving that CDM has driven, and frankly, sometimes the challenges of how to take the tools that are in the CDM toolbox and fit them into an agency's existing mission needs, has that created new communication channels and partnerships with other agencies outside of the CDM program office?
Yeah, I believe so. And I really think that moving forward, the request for services model that we're seeing evolve around CDM now, I think that's only going to go further down that path of helping us communicate with those external agencies, those external entities.
Okay. And I do want to come back to the data side and just the sheer volume that's there. Mm-hmm. How has that sort of changed the approach for NASA to try and bring more automation, more AI to the data, so that the focus that the humans bring can be to provide that insight and value? Has that been a dramatic shift in the last couple of years, or is it also much more of an incremental trying tools in small bits and pieces?
The latter. Yeah. I shirk away from saying that anything has been this big monumental transformation. We're engineers at our core, and engineering is about the disciplined and incremental improvement of the tools and resources that we have available to us. I know that in the research sphere, machine learning and artificial intelligence are making great bounds, and there's been a lot of work done in democratizing the availability of those tools. But again, when it comes to organizational progress, especially at a large federal agency like NASA, I really think that the crux is the slow, incremental, small changes that we make.
Yeah. I want to pull in an audience question here, and we'll definitely sort of devote time at the end, but it's directly relevant to what we were just saying. And
Sure.
you mentioned you're an engineer and you want to get in and work on this and get the technologists really talking to one another and the security specialists talking. But this question was, do you see that the vernacular and sometimes the cultural exclusivity of cyber teams to be a barrier to the communication of other groups? And if so, what are some of the approaches that you've seen to bridge that gap?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So we are infamous in IT, but also in cybersecurity in particular, for developing our own jargon, right? And anybody who's been in the hacker realm at some point in their life knows that the jargon file was like a seminal document as far as hackers are concerned and people interested in cybersecurity are concerned. We're great at snowballing people out when it comes to having conversations about cybersecurity. And in reality, that does a disservice to us when really our focus is risk management, which has implications and ramifications well outside of the cybersecurity realm. And again, I can't seem to participate in one of these events without singing the praises of NIST and the special publications library that they've developed over the years. I really feel like they've done the federal government and really people outside of the federal government a great service by providing these special publications that lay out a common lexicon to talk about these complex topics in a uniform and consistent manner. And I want to say that as a leader at NASA, one of the things that I've contributed, I think, to our ability to do cybersecurity is an emphasis on adoption of those special publications as the groundwork for how we speak about stuff. Mm-hmm. And whether it's 830 outlining, the way we define threat sources, or 853, everyone's favorite, for talking about how we organize our defenses and how we organize the controls that we build up around systems. I mean, without those frameworks, we'd all just be creating our own jargon and talking past each other, which, again, when thematic of your approach to cybersecurity is improving communication, you can't have that. So.
Sorry, I'm laughing a little bit because if you had told me before I came to the space that people would have their favorite NIST special publications, I would have. It's absolutely the case. Now, I feel as though NIST has done an exceptionally good job on the outreach side over the last couple of years on risk management, on identity management, on zero trust. But I also don't know if it has been a kind of shift or gradual improvement, or if it's just that I wasn't paying close enough attention before that. Have you seen the dynamic of the NIST special publications and the kind of building a common vernacular? Has that changed in recent times?
I think it has. Whereas before, these were documents that lived as sort of these monolithic PDFs that people could download and read. I feel like NIST has actually made a lot of really good gains in opening up how these documents are authored and matured. And I'll point as a recent example, 863, which maybe 4 years ago, they essentially put up on GitHub and said, hey, this document is now available for public contribution. That's a mind-blowing thing, especially for somebody like me with a background in software engineering, to see this big federal government-developed technical document opened up for public contribution in such a open and welcoming way. And I think that has been thematic of how NIST has matured as an organization writing these documents, and I can't applaud them enough for it. I mean, I think it's fantastic.
Good. We've got a bunch of audience questions I want to get to, but one thing I want to touch on before we do is the obvious changes that have affected every agency since February or March as we move to maximum telework and all the other adjustments to COVID-19. Can you talk a little bit about how that pivot has impacted NASA and your work in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think obviously everybody's kind of been struggling with the changes to how we do our work in response to the pandemic. And certainly NASA is no exception. We moved predominantly to a remote workforce as soon as the pandemic really hit. That's a significant shift for an agency where we have a lot of real estate and a lot of people driving to it every single day, day in and day out. I want to say that if we bring this into the context of cybersecurity and where it kind of forced us to shift our focus, obviously this notion of network borders and how we manage them, and do strict moat and castle wall network borders make sense in a modern remote workforce context? Do we have to go back and re-explore the principal tenets of something like zero trust architecture and understand how we need to maybe implement aspects of that at our agency to improve the way people are working from home? And that's been a decided shift, I think, in the problems that the cybersecurity community at NASA has been trying to tackle. So yeah, absolutely. It's been a big deal. And I'm personally very excited about it because I think we've been talking about zero trust architecture for years and years and years in the cybersecurity space. And I think it was serendipity that NIST put out its first, or not first, I think it was like third or fourth draft of the zero trust architecture document right as people were going home for the pandemic. I was like, what great timing is this? And the increased conversation around that has been great.
Absolutely. And one more sort of aspect of COVID. What about the SOC and the threat analysis work in particular? Were there changes that you had to make to be able to give your analysts access to the data when they weren't on-prem, or other kind of data sharing adjustments that had to be made?
I want to say that not directly in response to coronavirus. Fortunately, we had done a lot of that work up front in giving people the access that they need to communicate across centers. The previously siloed incident response groups at any given center were largely already very collaborative and communicating openly due to a lot of that work that we did well ahead of coronavirus. And it's paid dividends.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Couple audience questions I want to read verbatim to make sure that I get them correct. Gail Hogan asked, are you seeing a convergence of high side ISSO/ISSMs and low side versions of the same into the cyber organization under CISO purview? Typically in a contractor space, the classified ISSO's report to the FSO is not a cyber professional. Is anyone seeing a shift in the alignment of these resources?
I know certainly at headquarters, my colleagues working on what you would call the high side, we've always had good communication and we've always been able to facilitate each other's work. I don't know that I can speak to that like agency-wide, but I know certainly that the teams at headquarters, we've always been pretty cohesive. And yeah.
Okay.
Sorry for that non-answer.
No, sometimes that is the answer we get. The next one is a little broader, and Donna Wilt was asking how sort of two unique aspects of NASA's mission and culture impact cybersecurity approaches. One is the length of space over which data travels, and with the obvious from satellites, but also the broad sharing of those data sets around the world, and then the emphasis on citizen science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, could you
just sort of how those maybe make NASA's cybersecurity approach different than an intelligence community agency or a more internally focused agency?
Sure. So the familiar triad of cybersecurity is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And as a cybersecurity professional at NASA, I've actually often been asked the question, your agency's mission is to do science and share that information with the world. Why do you even need cybersecurity? And my response is that confidentiality is not always the focus of cybersecurity. I see cybersecurity's function at the agency is protecting our capacity to share the stuff that we develop and the information that we come across. So yeah, in that sense, it really becomes more about how do we ensure the public's trust in the information that we produce? How do we ensure that we're keeping things up and running and available for when they're needed? That really becomes like the focus. Now, I'm not saying that confidentiality is a non-issue at the agency, certainly not, but it's really about protecting our capacity to do our mission. And our mission is very much about sharing.
Very good. This question is back in the specific realm, and Matt Crawford asks, or rather asserts, that NASA's Application Division Software License Management Office is currently underfunded. Does that produce holes in the IT lifecycle management capabilities, or do you think that that this affects the security profile of the agency?
Again, thematic of all of my responses thus far. Anything that challenges the ability for teams to collaborate and communicate is going to be a challenge for cybersecurity. I can't speak specifically to the funding of any given organization, but a bold assertion to be sure. And I would say that anything that challenges our ability to communicate and collaborate will have impacts on cybersecurity. And so as a cybersecurity professional, it's always been my objective to, in any way that I can, facilitate the reducing of those barriers, the lowering of those barriers.
Okay, and along that line of working with all partners, there was an IG report a week or so ago that pointed out some areas of improvement for NASA on the IT security front. And I'm curious sort of what your take is on not specific recommendations, but about the gaps that were identified and sort of how that fits with this sort of constant iteration and improvement that you've been outlining.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair question. I want to say that there's like an unfortunate tendency to think of OIGs as somehow adversarial. And that's not the case. The work that OIG does, especially at NASA, is fantastic. And over my tenure, certainly under the leadership of people like Renee Wynn and Mike Witt, agency say-so, and former agency CIO, I feel like I've seen our relationship with our OIG improve a great deal. And we look forward, I think, to the findings that come out of their investigations and audits because they help us get better. And again, I feel like that goes directly back to this being open and receptive to communication from any team. That's going to pay off dividends for cybersecurity, and certainly the case with OIG and the audits that they perform. We like our OIG, and we appreciate the work that they do. And I firmly believe that.
Great, thank you. And the last question that we have time for today is just a little bit of your crystal ball. You talked about how this is constant improvement and looking for ways to iterate going forward. Where is the emphasis for the next 6 to 12 months? Where's your focus, and what should we be watching as NASA continues to try and evolve its security and its threat detection?
Well, certainly I don't want to draw focus away from the actual mission successes that are occurring at the agency. Certainly when we see the big launches and we see the big moves towards improvement of how we do science throughout the solar system, like that's the focus. Cybersecurity is a support organization, and we're going to be working tirelessly, I think, behind the scenes. I think if I crystal ball it, I think that the tenets of building out good zero trust architectures are going to be a focus. And that's talking specifically about like improving how we manage ICANN, how we manage configuration management of our networks, like the real bread and butter cybersecurity stuff, the fundamentals, if you will. I think that's going to be critical in the next several years.
All right. Well, Karim, thank you so much for spending part of your morning with us today and giving us a little bit of view into how NASA is tackling this fast evolving world.
Yeah, my pleasure. This was